Two fake cops, guns drawn, no lights, no patrol car, and only my gut instinct between me and disaster. You ever get that gut feeling that something's wrong before your brain even has a chance to figure out why? That's exactly how my night began. Every instinct screaming danger, even before a single sound confirmed it. It was just after 9 p.m., and the neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet where even the smallest noise seems amplified. My dog, Baxter, was half asleep near the door, his tail flicking lazily on the rug, when suddenly, bang, bang, bang! 3 sharp, heavy knocks that reverberated through the wooden door. Not polite, not neighborly, the kind that makes your heart leap into your throat. "Open up! Police!" a voice barked, commanding, authoritative. I froze. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men in dark uniforms, badges glinting under the porch light, radios crackling faintly, holsters with guns at their hips. They looked official at first glance, but something didn't feel right. The street outside had no flashing lights, no marked patrol cars, just a black SUV idling near the curb like a shadow waiting. My stomach tightened. My dog perked up instantly, ears stiff, growling low. He sensed the same tension I did. The taller man, mid-40s, shaved head, square jaw, stepped closer to the door. "Sir, we need to talk to you about a disturbance," he said. Forceful, sharp, not the tone of a typical local officer. It was the kind of voice used to make people obey without question. I squinted through the peephole. That's when my eyes caught the patch on his shoulder. Something subtle but unmistakable. It didn't match our local police department. It simply read, "Security Division." Security Division? My gut tightened even more. That wasn't a police patch I'd ever seen. I took a step back, my mind racing. My hands shook slightly. The adrenaline hit me, my chest pounding, breath quickening. This wasn't a routine check. This wasn't a neighborhood patrol. Something was wrong. The second man, stockier, his uniform slightly ill-fitting, tapped his radio and barked, "Sir, open the door now, or we'll be forced to enter." The words made my blood run cold. Enter? They couldn't. They weren't real cops, or so my instincts told me, but the thought of armed men barging into my home sent a shiver down my spine. I retreated slowly to the corner of the living room, keeping the door in view through a sliver of the curtain. Baxter pressed against my leg, growling quietly but tensely. I grabbed my phone off the side table, unlocking it with trembling fingers, dialed 911 and whispered, "There are 2 men at my door. They claim to be police, but their uniforms don't match. There's no marked car, no lights. I don't think they're real." The dispatcher's calm voice was the only thing steadying me. "What's your address, sir?" I gave it quickly, trying not to make a sound. "Okay. We don't have any units in your area right now. Stay inside, lock the doors, and do not open it for anyone. Real officers are on their way." Hearing that confirmed it. My worst fears were correct. Whoever was at my door wasn't law enforcement. Meanwhile, the knocking escalated into pounding. "Bang! Bang! Bang!" Baxter barked wildly, nails scratching against the hardwood as he bolted toward the door, growling deep and warning. I grabbed him, whispering urgently. "Quiet! Stay!" The taller man shouted again, this time louder. "Last! Warning! Open the door!" I forced myself to stay still, breathing shallow, mind racing through every worst-case scenario. What if they tried to kick the door in? What if they had backup waiting in the shadows? I moved slowly to the hallway window, peeking just enough to see outside without revealing myself. The black SUV's engine hummed softly, the tires resting on the gravel driveway. The men were speaking to each other now, low voices, frustrated. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone was angry, tense. I ducked back from the window. My house felt too quiet again, but every creak, every shifting shadow, made my nerves spike. The TV's paused image of a detective from the show I'd been watching seemed almost like an omen, his frozen eyes staring at me like he knew what was coming. Then suddenly, silence. No more pounding, no shouting. Just the faint hum of the black SUV and the distant sound of wind in the trees. I exhaled slowly, trying to convince myself that maybe they'd gone. My hands were clammy, my legs stiff. I sank behind the couch, gripping my phone like it was my lifeline. But then, the sound of footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate, circling the house. My stomach dropped. They weren't leaving. They were checking for another way in. I crouched down, whispering to Baxter, almost, "Help is coming." Almost. The night stretched endlessly, every second thick with fear and anticipation. And in the distance, a faint but distinct sound reached my ears. A siren, growing slowly louder. Red and blue lights began reflecting off the windows, painting the walls in streaks of relief and terror. The impostors didn't know it yet, but the real police were on their way, and the night was about to change forever. I didn't open the door, not a crack, not even enough to peek. My instinct screamed at me to stay put, to act like the house was empty, to make them believe no one was home. "Sir, open the door now, or we'll have to enter by force," the second man barked, his hand hovering over the weapon at his hip. The words hit me like a hammer. My heart was pounding in my ears. My mind raced through every possible scenario, somewhere between fear and disbelief. I stepped quietly back, my bare feet barely making a sound on the hardwood. I reached for my phone, the trembling in my hands betraying my outward calm. I dialed 911 and whispered into the receiver, trying to keep my voice steady despite the shaking. "2 officers at my door," I whispered. "They say they're police, but their uniforms look wrong. No marked car outside. Something doesn't feel right." The dispatcher paused for a long moment, and I felt my stomach tighten. Every second dragged like a lifetime. "Sir, stay inside," the calm voice finally said. "Lock the doors. Don't open it for anyone. Real units are on the way, but right now, you need to remain where you are." That confirmed it. My gut had been right all along. Whoever was outside wasn't police. They weren't here to enforce the law. They were here for intimidation or worse. The pounding on the door resumed, louder than before. Bang, bang, bang. Each hit against the wood made my chest feel like it would explode. Baxter, sensing the danger, barked fiercely, his nails scraping against the floor as he darted toward the door. I grabbed him quickly and whispered, "Quiet, Baxter. Stay close." The taller man outside shouted again, his voice laced with frustration and threat. "Last warning! Open the door!" I froze. The words echoed in my head, each syllable a countdown toward disaster. My hands gripped the phone like a lifeline, knuckles white. Every muscle in my body was tense, my senses sharpened to every sound. Outside I could hear low voices now, muttered words I couldn't make out, but felt every bit as threatening. They were arguing, planning. The SUV sat idling, a silent, menacing presence at the end of the driveway. The scene felt like a predator circling its prey. I crouched behind the couch, peering through the blinds in a narrow slit to keep them in sight. My eyes traced their every movement. The shorter man tugged at his jacket, adjusting the badge, checking his radio. The taller man leaned slightly, into the SUV's open trunk, pretending to check something. But my gut told me they were coordinating, looking for a weakness, searching for a way in. The room felt smaller with every passing moment. Every sound, creaking floorboards, distant cars, the whisper of wind through the trees, seemed amplified. Baxter pressed closer, trembling slightly, his body a living warning system that I couldn't ignore. Then, suddenly, silence. No more pounding, no more shouting. Just the faint hum of the SUV engine and the occasional rustle of the night air. My chest ached with tension. For a fleeting moment, I dared to hope they had gone. But the crunch of gravel under boots shattered that hope instantly. They were moving around the side of the house. I could hear the faint shuffle, the whisper of their voices again. My stomach dropped. They weren't leaving. They were checking for another way in. I moved cautiously toward the back door, deadbolting it and sliding the latch into place. Then the side windows. Then the laundry room and kitchen locks. Each click of the deadbolt felt like a heartbeat in my chest, loud and oppressive. Baxter stayed close, his eyes wide, body tense against mine. I whispered, "Almost. Help is coming." Almost. My voice shook, but it was all I could do to keep my mind focused. Through the narrow blinds, I caught glimpses of them by the side fence. The taller man's flashlight beam cut across the yard, glinting off the windows. For a terrifying moment, the beam rested on the curtains I hid behind. My breath caught in my throat. Then finally the beam moved on. I sank down on the floor, pressing my back against the wall, phone clutched tightly in my hand. The minutes stretched endlessly. Each second was a suspended heartbeat. My mind raced through possibilities. Were they alone? Was this a setup? How had they known my house? And then, far off in the distance, a faint sound. A sound that made my blood run just a little less cold. A siren. Soft at first, then gradually louder. The sound of salvation inching closer. The red and blue reflections began dancing faintly along the side of my house. The impostors didn't know it yet, but their time was almost up. I stayed crouched, listening. The footsteps by the side fence faded. The SUV engine purred softly as they whispered urgently to each other, clearly agitated. They didn't know help was almost here. For the first time that night. A flicker of hope pierced the terror. I whispered to Baxter again, "Almost. Just a little longer." And then the sirens grew louder, closer, a tangible promise that the nightmare outside my door was about to meet the law. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension tighten and release just a fraction. But deep down I knew this was far from over. Whoever had sent those men wasn't finished. The real danger, I realized, was only beginning. The night stretched ahead, thick with fear and anticipation, as I waited for the flashing lights to reach my driveway. 5 minutes felt like an eternity. The pounding in my chest was deafening, my palms sweaty and trembling as I crouched behind the couch. Then, in the distance, faint flashes of red and blue painted the horizon. At first I thought I was imagining it, a trick of the streetlights. But then the unmistakable hum of police sirens reached my ears. Slow at first, then building steadily. The flashing lights grew closer, cutting through the night like knives. Shadows stretched across my walls, dancing in rhythm with the revolving sirens. I peered through the blinds, heart hammering, and saw the unmistakable shapes of 2 patrol cars rolling up my street. Lights spinning, sirens quiet but urgent. The fake cops were still there, frozen by the SUV, pretending to check something in the trunk. Their movements were tense, awkward, betraying their earlier bravado. I could almost see the realization dawning on them. They weren't prepared for this. When the real officers stepped out of their cars, the scene exploded into chaos. "Hands up! Drop your weapons!" one officer shouted, authoritative and immediate. Time slowed. The taller imposter, mid-40s, squared his shoulders and froze. The stockier one twitched toward his holster, his fatal mistake. In a split second, 3 red laser dots appeared on his chest and shoulders. The night lit up in red and blue reflections off the SUVs in the driveway. My legs went weak. Baxter whined low at my side, sensing the final confrontation. The imposters froze entirely. One slowly raised his hands, the other dropped to his knees, palms flat against the asphalt. Their confident, threatening facade had crumbled entirely in an instant. The real police moved like a well-oiled machine. 3 officers covered, 2 approached for the takedown. Cuffs clicked, weapons were secured in evidence bags, and each movement was sharp, precise, practiced. The imposters were no longer in control. They were completely exposed. From inside, I could see everything through the blinds. The plastic badges, the fake patches, the makeshift name tags. Every detail that had set off my gut instinct earlier now staring me squarely in the face. They weren't law enforcement. They were frauds, criminals pretending to wield authority. I gripped the doorframe as I stepped outside, legs trembling under the weight of adrenaline and relief. The night air hit me, sharp and cold, carrying the smell of asphalt, gasoline from the idling SUV, and the faint metallic tang of fear lingering in the driveway. One officer approached, her uniform crisp, badge shining under the flashing lights. "Sir, you did the right thing calling us," she said, her voice calm but firm. "These men are not officers. They're impostors." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands. Why would they come here? "They had guns!" She shook her head slightly. "We're going to find out. For now, stay behind the line of officers. It's not safe to go near them yet." Behind them, the two fake cops were being searched, their guns taken, their fake badges placed into evidence bags. One of them glared toward my house, eyes burning with a mix of anger and panic.
"Open up, police!"
The other avoided looking at me, staring down at the asphalt, defeated. Neighbors had started appearing at their windows, whispering and pointing, drawn out by the flashing lights and the commotion. A few bold ones came out onto the street in slippers and robes, trying to see what had happened. Mr. Leonard from across the street shook his head, muttering, "What the hell?" The taller officer barked instructions to the impostors, their hands raised, knees on the ground. The red and blue lights reflected off the pavement, painting a surreal, almost cinematic tableau. I could see my reflection in the chrome trim of the patrol cars, a mixture of relief, fear, and lingering disbelief etched on my face. The officers spoke into their radios, coordinating. One officer took notes, photographing the scene, while another secured the impostors into separate patrol cars. Every move was methodical, professional, and precise. As the officers finally motioned me to step back toward the sidewalk, my legs felt unsteady. Baxter stayed close, panting softly, ears perked. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted, but aware that I had just avoided a situation that could have turned deadly in a matter of seconds. The female officer looked at me again, this time with a small nod of reassurance. "You kept calm, stayed inside, and called us immediately. That's why no one was hurt. You did everything right." I nodded slowly, trying to process it. The street was quieting down now, the flashing lights slowly fading as additional units secured the area and collected evidence. The black SUV was towed away, a silent reminder of what could have happened. For the first time that night, I exhaled fully, feeling a mixture of relief, disbelief, and lingering fear. My heart was still racing, but at least the immediate danger was gone. Yet deep down, I knew the story didn't end here. Whoever had sent those men didn't expect real police to show up. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a larger, more dangerous story, one that I would soon uncover. The night, illuminated by flashing lights and sirens, had shifted. What started as a terrifying encounter with two armed impostors had turned into a full-blown confrontation with the law. And as the police loaded the fake officers into the patrol cars, one thing was clear. The nightmare wasn't over. Not yet. So, who were they? That was the question gnawing at me the next morning as sunlight spilled weakly into my living room, the house still thick with tension from the previous night. Even Baxter, my normally energetic dog, seemed subdued, curling up in a corner as if he understood something terrible had nearly happened. A detective came by early, clipboard in hand, calm but sharp-eyed. His presence brought a mix of relief and anxiety. Someone official. Someone trained, yet someone who was about to tell me how deep this went. "Sir, we need to go over your security footage and take statements," he said, voice measured, authoritative. "We also need to run some background checks on the two men who came to your house." I nodded silently, still processing everything from last night, the pounding on my door, the way the imposters froze when the real police arrived, the surreal sight of red lasers illuminating their chests. My stomach churned as I remembered the guns, the threats, the way their faces twisted in panic when they realized they were outmatched. We went through the footage first. The video was grainy, but enough to make out their uniforms, the SUV, and most importantly, their behavior. Every step, every glance, every pause seemed rehearsed. Practiced for intimidation rather than for legitimate police work. "Look at this," the detective said, pointing at a frame where the taller man was checking his belt, the smaller man glancing around nervously. "Notice how they're not following any standard procedure. This isn't law enforcement training. It's staged. They're trying to look authoritative, but it's all fake. My mind raced. Who would do this? Who would actually send armed impostors to my house? Then came the revelation that made my blood run cold. The detective ran their IDs through the system. Both men were licensed private security contractors, but not just any contractors. Their records linked directly to none other than our homeowners association. Yes, my HOA. I stared at him, dumbfounded. They work for the HOA? He nodded. Specifically, they were hired by the HOA president. According to the documentation, their job was, quote, to enforce property standards. He paused, as if weighing his words carefully, which in normal language usually means they're supposed to issue warnings, fines, or notices, not show up at someone's home armed and pretending to be police. I felt a wave of disbelief and anger crash over me. My supposed crime? Leaving my garbage cans by the driveway for an extra night. That's it. One measly night. A minor infraction by any reasonable standard. And somehow, that earned me an armed confrontation with imposters posing as law enforcement. They weren't supposed to have guns, the detective continued, his tone steady but grave. Badges, holsters, radios, none of that was authorized. Whoever hired them disregarded every protocol. This could have ended in death, sir, and legally, that's a huge liability for the HOA and potentially criminal charges for those involved. Hands clenched into fists, rage mixed with lingering fear. The realization hit me. These people, who were supposed to maintain the neighborhood, had orchestrated a real-life nightmare. And it was all over something trivial, petty, and completely avoidable. I thought back to the pounding on my door, the shouting, the way the taller man's eyes narrowed as he barked at me. The way they circled my house like predators, checking every possible entry point. Every second of that night, I had been inches away from disaster. The detective continued reviewing footage, showing me timestamps of the SUV idling down the street earlier that day, seemingly patrolling my block. They had scoped out the location, he said grimly. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. I felt my stomach twist. Planned by my HOA. My neighbors, the people I waved to on morning walks, were technically complicit, directly or indirectly, in hiring these men. And there's more, the detective added. We've already contacted the city attorney and the HOA board. There will be investigations, potential charges, and sanctions. But for now, you did the right thing by staying calm and calling 911. That's what saved you. I exhaled, slowly, shakily. Relief battled with lingering fury. The truth had come out, but knowing it didn't erase the terror of the night before. It didn't erase the image of their hands on guns, or the thought of what might have happened if I'd opened the door. I realized something else too. This wasn't just about me. The HOA had crossed a line. They had weaponized fear and authority, targeting anyone who stepped out of line over petty disputes. And I wasn't the only one. The list of complaints, I suspected, must be long. As the detective packed up and left, leaving me with the weight of the revelation and a quiet house that still smelled faintly of adrenaline and fear, I sank into a chair, Baxter curling up beside me. The nightmare had a name now. My HOA. And now that I knew who had sent the imposters, the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The quiet neighborhood around me suddenly felt different, familiar, yet sinister. Somewhere, beyond the streetlights and trimmed lawns, the people responsible for nearly getting me killed were already planning their next move. But one thing was certain. I wouldn't be intimidated. Not by anyone, not ever again. And in that moment, I knew the story I had just survived was far from over. Within just a few days, everything changed. What started as a terrifying, personal encounter inside my quiet suburban home exploded into something much bigger. The story hit the local news first, then regional channels, and within 48 hours, it was trending across social media. The headline said it all. HOA sends fake cops to homeowner's house. Arrests made after real police step in. I still remember watching the first broadcast from my couch, the same spot where I had crouched in fear that night. Seeing my own house, my street, and those flashing red and blue lights replayed on TV was surreal. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages from neighbors, co-workers, even distant relatives. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Is it true? Yes, it was. Every terrifying second of it. At first, the HOA denied everything. Their spokesperson released a statement claiming the two men had acted independently and were never authorized to visit residents. But that flimsy defense fell apart fast, because the truth, as it always does, found its way to the surface. When the police released the body cam footage, it was game over. The video showed everything. The fake cop standing by the black SUV, one muttering under his breath, "The HOA sent us." That single sentence shattered every lie, every denial, every attempt to cover it up. The news anchors replayed that clip on loop for days. Public outrage grew. Neighbors who had once praised the HOA for keeping the community orderly suddenly turned on them, demanding accountability. Within a week, the fallout began. The two impostors were charged with impersonating law enforcement, unlawful possession of firearms, and attempted home invasion. Their mugshots were plastered across every local paper. The taller one, the one who had yelled at my door, stared blankly at the camera. The shorter one looked like he already regretted everything. The HOA president, the man who had authorized the enforcement visit, tried to play innocent. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, that he didn't know they'd show up armed. But when investigators pulled text messages and emails between him and the security contractors, his defense crumbled. One message read, "Make sure he understands not to ignore HOA orders again. Be firm." That was the nail in the coffin. The HOA board turned on him almost instantly. They held an emergency meeting, behind closed doors, of course, and by the end of the night, he was out. Officially, they called it a resignation. Unofficially, it was survival. They needed a scapegoat to save themselves, and he was the perfect one. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a sense of grim satisfaction watching it all unfold. The same people who had tried to silence me, who thought they could intimidate me into submission, were now the ones scrambling to protect their own reputations. But even as the headlines moved on and the outrage died down, the aftermath for me didn't just vanish overnight. It took weeks before I could sleep without checking the locks 3 times. Every sudden noise made my pulse spike. Every knock on the door made my stomach drop. Sometimes I'd wake up at 2 a.m., heart pounding, convinced I heard footsteps outside again. The fear lingered, but so did something else. A sense of purpose. Because the real victory came not from the arrests or the resignations or even the news coverage. It came when a city council member reached out to me personally. He'd seen the footage, read the reports, and was outraged that something like this could happen under the guise of neighborhood safety. Within weeks, he introduced a local ordinance that banned homeowners associations from hiring or deploying armed private security without direct police oversight. The law passed unanimously. For the first time, there was accountability, real, tangible change born from one terrifying night. I never wanted to be the reason a law got written. But when I sat in that city hall meeting listening to them discuss it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because the fear had vanished, but because it had meant something. People began to approach me afterward. Neighbors, strangers, even police officers, saying you did the right thing, or that law is going to protect a lot of people. And every time, I thought back to that gut feeling, that first moment when I knew something was wrong. Now, when people ask what really happened that night, I tell them this: always trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Never open your door just because someone says they're the police. Verify, call, check. Your life might depend on it, and never, ever underestimate how far some people will go when they think a little power makes them untouchable. Because that night, 2 fake cops thought they could scare me into silence, that they could flash badges and bark orders and make me crumble. But when the real police showed up, when the truth came crashing down, they were the ones who froze. And in that frozen moment, red and blue lights flashing across their stunned faces, I realized something powerful. You can't fake authority forever. Eventually, the truth shows up with real badges, real justice, and a very real reminder that fear doesn't always win. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life terrifying experiences, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment below. Have you ever had a gut feeling that saved your life? I want to hear your story.